Welcome in, welcome in. I will do what I love to call a pre-panel buffer, where I just talk and try to tell some jokes, let people trickle in. And while I do that, I will also introduce myself. Hello, everyone. My name is Lennon Torres, pronouns she, her, hers, and I am a dancer, LGBTQ plus advocate, and communications expert with experience working on really large and really small advocacy and political campaigns. And I wrote in my bio almost a decade, but as I was sitting here, I realized it's been over a decade of professional dance experience, which makes me feel old. But here we are. And I have just always been super passionate about advocacy, social communication, and dance, and how that all intersects. And the way that that has kind of come to fruition for me in my career has been through gender equity consulting, most recently for some major ballet companies across North America. And I also continue to use my voice to shape the narrative around what it means to be transgender in our entertainment industry, and also have been documenting my transition publicly in some different outlets such as E! News, 17, to really inspire a greater understanding and compassion for transgender and the LGBTQ plus community. I've also worked on a fair amount of sets modeling as well. And I actually kind of contextualizing today for everyone, met one of our panelists, Athena, on set for a music video by an artist that both of us just adore, Tessa Violet. And it was a really awesome experience for me. It was one of my first dance jobs as a proudly out transgender woman. And it was just a really awesome experience. And Athena and I got to chatting about what it means to be queer on set, and what does that mean when you enter the costume department. And I had so many amazing things to say about everything in the practices that Athena was instilling, and the culture that Athena had in her costume department. In their costume department, excuse me. And I just was over the moon with it. And it was a big learning experience for me. I learned a lot. And so I'm excited to sit with you all today and chat with you all. So I will kick it off. I'm going to go through by sharing everyone's bios and pronouns. So I will start out with introducing our panel. First up is Morgan Sullivan. If you want to do a wave, pronouns he, they. Title actor and filmmaker. Some previous projects include Broad City, Dickinson's, HBO's I Know This Much Is True, and Dead Ringers, as well as starring in Matthew Puccini's film Dirty, Sundance, Special Recognition and Acting Award, South by Southwest. Morgan's films Here With You and Going Away have screened internationally and at U.S. festivals, including Frameline, Outfest, and Newsfest. And you can get more info on their website, morgan-sullivan.com. Moving on to Leah Morrison. Leah, like Princess Leia. Pronouns she, her, a costume designer, currently working in new character development and production for Wait Disney Imagineering Live Entertainment. Most recently, her work was showcased at Tribeca Film Fest, Atlanta Film Fest, and Outfest. Her TV credits include The Marvelous Mrs. Maisel and Search Party. Her work has been showcased on Broadway in Hamilton, Beetlejuice, Hadestown, I'll Just Let It Happen, and Harry Potter and the Cursed Child. She received a BFA from NYU. For more info, you can email leahbmorrison97@gmail.com. Moving right along, we've got an incredible name, Provvidenza. I can't get over it. I've been thinking about it all morning. And their pronouns are Enza, they, and them. Is a community motivator and performance artist working in Los Angeles. Enza's work explores shame, revolutionary optimism, queered value systems, and the creation of care-based communities. Provvidenza organizes with Them Fatali, the Los Angeles lady arm wrestlers and unauthorized gays. They are currently pursuing a MFA in performance pedagogy, building upon over 10 years of organizing and direct action work. Enza's new performance work, Butch Visions, debuts this fall. And I know Enza's most recent had a really awesome experience last night. We were chatting about it before, so I'm sure we'll hear a little bit about that today as well. And then finally, the person who brought me here today, we have Athena Lawton, they, them pronouns, is an educator, content creator, and costume designer for film, television, and live events. They are known for their work in esports and gaming, notably for their work on Riot Games' Emmy Award-winning League of Legends World Tournament. They create popular tutorial content that centers queer self-expression through creativity. Find their work on TikTok, Instagram, and YouTube as Athena Lawton, spelled as their name on Zoom. So we've got quite the panel. After reading all those bios for, I think, the second or third time, I'm like, wow, like I just want to sit and listen to all of you and hear about all your amazing experiences. But I think first and foremost, we're in a webinar format. So any of my participants who are here today, really keep track of any questions that come up. We will do a Q&A at the end of this, and I would love to hear from you as well as our other panelists as well. And I think right off the bat, I really want to ground us in the goal for this conversation. And the goal for this conversation is to really understand each other, come to new realizations, learn from each other, hear new perspectives. Not every single person's perspective is going to be the same. And that's the beauty of queerness. And that's the beauty of conversations like this. And so I really hope that as a moderator, I can facilitate that. And I love to share in the beginning of a panel what is important to me that you all take away from this as the moderator. And first and foremost, that's going to be that you took away just understanding and empathy as we navigate these conversations. Some of these are super fun and exciting and fun to talk about, and some are just a little heavier. So we will be holding each other's hands through the entire thing. And with that, I will let us hear from some panelists. I think first and foremost, I would love to just start out with kind of level setting us here. So the experience that brought me here was Athena. We met on set for a music video, and I, as a transgender woman, it was my first job back after 2.5 years of transitioning, and Athena made sure that I was very taken care of. There were multiple queer people on set, and I would love to just level set. Athena, what were some of those practices that you kind of thought of at the beginning of that process that helped you lay the stage for a safe set?
So that's a great question. I think that we only were introduced to each other about 4 days before the shoot. And so at that point, I really wanted to make sure that we could make the best space for you possible, and also for the other queer members of our cast, because you weren't the only trans woman on set. So, but with that short scale time frame, which is often the case in film, where we don't have a lot of time to prep and have to move through fittings and castings really quickly, it was honestly a little bit of a scramble at the last second to make sure that we had the right things that you needed to feel comfortable in the job. And there was a big conversation around like, what kinds of undergarments do we need to prepare so that you can feel your best while wearing all of these leotards and really skin tight outfits. And I suddenly realized in that moment that there weren't any local sources where I could just like pop to the store and like find those things. And so it really made me start thinking seriously about how to keep those things in my kit all the time, just so that when those moments come up, we're not left trying to figure out where to find something 2 days before the shoot. Because also it was a Friday and the shoot was on a Monday. So there was no next day shipping like possible. And I think as costume designers, many of us will be familiar with these kinds of scenarios where it's like, how do we get this together real quick? And so I wanted to make sure right away that I got you on the phone and that we started texting about it and started just a dialogue. And I really wanted to allow you the space to also guide that dialogue on what you needed and to tell me, and then we could figure out an action plan together. And also just making sure that, I think especially with productions that involve dance, a lot of dancers have this standard where they're like, oh, we're all used to getting naked around each other, we'll just throw off our clothes. And I was like, well, let's make sure that we have like adequate changing spaces for everyone, and that everybody feels like, you know, they're they have the privacy that is needed. And this is something that I always say: when we make spaces safer for queer and trans people, we make them safer for everyone. Because maybe this doesn't necessarily need to be the standard that everyone in the dance community is just okay with getting naked around each other, because I feel like that sets a tone that people will feel forced to go along with, even if they actually are uncomfortable.
Absolutely. And I think what really stuck out to me, I'm a sucker for rosebud and thorn. If you know what that is, great. If you don't, just ignore me for a second. But I do think that what I hear is there's a high point from Athena of opening the dialogue prior to set. That is obviously something that's just best practice, but also realizing that not every situation is going to be all roses. It's not going to be all like easy. And there were issues on set with having spaces for everyone to change away from the crew. And I think that one amazing thing is because we open that dialogue prior to set, a lot of the dancers, queer and not queer, felt comfortable sharing that concern. And therefore, it made for a much more malleable set, which I think is really, really important when you're, dealing with these types of sensitive topics and sensitive conversations. Athena also brought up how they talked to me prior. And that is just so, so important. I want to open it up to other panelists. Does that spur any thoughts for you? Do any of you have experiences about how we really jump-started a safer set, maybe, or maybe an example of how you didn't jumpstart a safer set?
Bouncing off that, I think just speaking to what Athena said about the quick timelines that we have, I think that is something that really does work against us in a lot of ways, where, you might want to have that conversation, but then you get that your actor the night before and you're going to be on set the next day. So I really love that you called out just making sure to have some of those things in your kit so that you can start those conversations. They can be driven by the actor, but you are also prepared for different things and that might be required. I think that's just like a really good best practice to have. But yeah, I agree. I think it's important, even if you have a little bit of time, to engage in that conversation as much as you can, and to really let that come from you, and rather as the designer, rather than the performer having to speak up and create that space. I think it's really important that as designers, we sort of set that standard that this is an open space for you to have that conversation, and this is a welcoming space for us to receive feedback and to receive the conversation in a way that supports both us as designers and our performers.
I also want to lift up one more thing, and then I would love to hear from Enza and Morgan as well, if anything here is resonating, is the idea of really making sure that everyone understands that a safe set is just a safe set. I think that what really hasn't been uplifted yet, I mean, we're 10 minutes in, but is the idea that when you're making these spaces safer for, let's say in my situation with Athena, a transgender woman and a dancer whose bodies is their instrument, it's really important that we think like, well, that made all the other cisgendered dancers as well, who maybe this conversation doesn't impact as much, feel safer on set as well. So I just wanted to name that a safer set is a safer set for everyone. And I think that's also a really important part of this conversation. This doesn't always have to be separate. We're just having a conversation today about how we can evolve certain situations and involve certain communities and norms in a way that welcome everyone. And that's a really big point that I think people should think about as well. Morgan, Provvidenza, anything in there that you feel like you want to jump in on, and totally okay if not.
Yeah, I can talk a little bit. So I'm just nodding my head a lot when everyone else is talking about like how quickly everything moves. So I mostly work in like TV and film. And as we know, like especially with TV, things are like this. So I don't usually have the chance to meet like anybody in the costume department until like the day of my fitting. And yeah, so I don't usually have like the opportunity to like really speak with people ahead of time. But I've noticed that it has been like really helpful like, especially when it's like a trans role that I'm playing, like they will have like many different garment options and many different sizes available for me to try. And like, I it feels nice to know that they've like put that little bit of extra thought into that and like making me feel comfortable. Yeah, the projects that I've had like more opportunity to like speak ahead of time is like for more like independent projects or like my own films and stuff where because I work with like other trans actors mainly. And so I like try to start that conversation pretty early so that everyone feels comfortable. Yeah.
Awesome. Okay, cool. I also am going to do this thing. I have a very type A brain. And so I feel like from this conversation, some things that like, if people are here to watch and hear and really take away some things, what I've also would like to bring up something tactical that we can take away from this. And Athena actually didn't mention this. And I'm wondering if they remember even doing this, but at the very beginning of the process, they sent out like a Google survey, I think, of is that right, Athena? Did you? Okay. I want to make sure I had my wires right, but I remember that was a really awesome way to do it. And I remember on there, it left open space. Is there anything that you want to share with the costume department that would help create a better space for you? It was not, create a better queer space for you, a better this for you. It was just better space, and whether that's space for someone to share about different body insecurities they have, or whether they really feel passionately about dressing privately. Or for in my case, I made sure to put, I am transgender, I'm going to need transgender undergarments. And that was what spurred our conversation. So a Google survey is a great way to do it in a tight turnaround. If you have the luxury of time, like Morgan was mentioning, having those conversations one-on-one, which Athena and I also did. And then also the third thing that I feel like we can take away is just having your kits stocked. So, you have, skin toned, multiple different types of skin tones for bras, underwear, compression things, socks. And, maybe it's of best practice to have a couple different tuck kits or different packing kits that can also be a part of your regular repertoire inside of those kits. So I think that's a really awesome spot for us to just level set there. I think something that I would love to hear just perspective on from the panel is what is the best way? So let's fast forward. We talked about preset, we get into set. What is the best way to find out somebody's pronouns on set if you don't know them and you haven't had that conversation yet? So let's level set, say we had a crazy preset situation. We haven't gone to talk to anyone. Your first time meeting a crew. How, from our perspective, what's the best way that you've kind of gathered that information, or what's one of the best ways that someone's asked you that information?
Yeah, I mean, I think with any of these kinds of experiences where it's getting information from somebody that might be like a little personal or intimate, is like remembering that in this relationship, the costume designer or is like has more power, right? Like in this scenario. And the best way to like show up is to sort of have a consciousness around what the power differential is within the context of a scenario. Like, especially speaking to like what Morgan was saying, for folks when we're day players or we're just coming in for that quick moment, like, I think it's important just as like a frame to be like, I'm the person who's directing this moment. So it makes sense for me to preemptively begin by saying, hey, I'm Provvidenza, I use they, them. What about you? Is there anything, and I think just like anything else, like a practical tool and relationship building tool, I want to add just to sort of go beyond pronouns and just like interacting with folks is like, just like anything else, like the best relationships are built off of opportunities when you can invite us in to decisions or to just like perspective, right? Like, I think that like, it's like I once was a pastor on a show. It is inherently silly to try on pastor garments, right? And like an opportunity for us to sort of laugh and be like, okay, that's maybe like a little too Meryl Streep in Doubt. Like, let's go a little contemporary here. Like, what are your thoughts? What are your feelings? Like, you can ultimately drive these conversations as the person who's making these creative decisions, but like just opportunities to like connect, invite in, opportunities for us to like assess our own autonomy, especially within a quick process. But yeah, I think what I would offer is just like pronouns are a great starting place to really start framing, hey, who is in power in this scenario, and how can I flatten it by just connecting, even if the moment is 10 minutes in a fitting, so I just like want to offer that as sort of a when we were having our rehearsal, the panelists and I kind of said to people, like, I sometimes feel like the gender 101 is sort of like propaganda at this point, and people get so caught up in language, right? It's all about like, you're non-binary, trans, like what, and it's like, at the end of the day, like, yes, of course I want to facilitate respect by being referred to the way that I've been asked. But more than anything, like, I want to connect, I want to buddy, like, I want to feel confident, like, I want to, like, the world is filled with fascism. Like, the least we can do is just like connect while we're making a movie or doing a play or something, so it's like, I think if I want to offer anything, it's like, that's a way to show up in space, is like, yes, getting people's pronouns, yes, sort of preemptively being the person to guide that, and more than anything, just like, remember, this is like a person to person thing, and if you fail and mess up, like, you literally just like, I feel like people get really stuck on this. It's like, if you just say like, Provvidenza, and you go, oh, she, like, just be like, sorry, they, and then keep going. Like, it doesn't need to be this like proselytizing of you, like getting rid of your shame in front of us. Like, it's really okay. Like, like we mix up people's names, like we pronounce people, it's all the same thing. It's just that since we're in a world that subjects us to being marginalized people, it seems like a different thing, but it really isn't that different than anything else that you're experiencing in your life. So I think that's also the relationship between like power and ego, and sort of flattening that to like just offer yourself as a person, and like, we are people, so we're going to take you in as a person too,
Yeah. Wow. That was great. I'm just gonna like leave some space for that to settle for a minute. I really, really want to uplift the part about you mentioning that we're all people and that we're connecting as people. That's literally the bread and butter of our industry. We're having human connections with people. And when I first started having these conversations, and for me, that was when I was starting to transition in college as a training and professional dancer. And while working in those environments, I had a teacher tell me that the best thing they learned from a queer person who was using non-conforming pronouns, they, them, or something that's not associated with their sex assigned at birth, but they said that they just were present. And when you're present in a room, you usually don't make those mistakes. And you see them for who they are, and you look at the person who's right in front of you. That's how you should approach any and all, for lack of better term, gender 101, or these types of different pedagogical things that we've come up with. It's all just learning how to interact with people. And so if you're really looking at who's in front of you, you've probably like don't, secrets out, like, you're probably really far along in this process, see people for who they are. And I also loved how Enza was mentioning when they were talking, that it doesn't always have to be so heavy. Yes, it's really important. Respect is bottom line. It should be our bottom line, but we're also just people. I talk a lot, so I'm going to open it up. Is there any other reactions to that as well that any of the other panelists want to jump in on?
I have something off that. I think just also flagging that it's important that you're not just doing that with your trans and non-binary cast, but that you're doing that with everybody. I think like a big experience I always hold on to is that there was a good like year to year and a half where I knew I was trans and I wasn't doing anything yet. I wasn't transitioning publicly. And those sorts of conversations or those sorts of environments, I think would have opened it up for me to be more open about those things sooner. And so I think just cluing everyone into, you don't always know what's going on with your cast or with people. And I mean, I think similar to what we were talking about earlier, that like when you're making this small change for your trans and non-binary cast, you're also supporting everyone. You're supporting, you're making a more supportive environment. But just sort of doing that as a every time rather than a specific time, I think it also helps you in those moments when you do have a trans person come into your room. You're already used to asking pronouns and sharing your own pronouns, even if it might feel like, oh, we already know, or it might feel redundant. I think one other thing I want to add too is that it's great to do check-ins throughout your time. If you have a cast that maybe you've been with them for 5 seasons, you know, I think checking in periodically. I have a friend who will post on Facebook sometimes and say, like pronoun check, and then everyone can like comment their pronouns. But I think that that's something as well that, you know, these things evolve and they change. And so also checking in periodically and just saying, hey, how are you doing? Just making sure you still like these pronouns. I know I do that with my friends sometimes too. So yeah.
I love that. I think, again, I'm just going to keep pulling out like tactical things. I love that this conversation is not necessarily always going to be a tactical conversation. But I want to pull them out when they happen so that we can like, you know, keep things moving, you know? And what I just heard is check-ins, you know, if you're working with the same crew for 5 seasons or it's a full season, maybe having a beginning, middle, and end, you know, whatever feels right for you in your process. And then also just making it a practice to treat everyone on set with the same intention. And that doesn't always mean the same actions, but it does mean you have the same goal, getting to understand somebody so that they can have the best possible work situation that they are going to have in your midst. So I wanted to just uplift that as well. Is there anything else any of the panelists want to add about that? Yes, Athena, go for it.
I would love to add a really negative pronoun experience that I had once, which is I was on a set that was made primarily up of like cis males. And the director, who was very well-meaning on the very first day of set, wanted to have a get to know each other circle with about 30 people. And he wanted to go around the circle and have everyone say their name and pronouns. And it was, I'll tell you the reason why this was a terrible experience and not a positive one is because I realized that I was going to be the only person in this circle of about 30 people who had, you know, non-conforming pronouns. And so I really felt like I was being put on the spot as a trans person in this moment. And it just felt like 10 minutes of, you know, like cis man, he, him, and then me being like, okay, Athena, they, them. It felt like not a positive way to do that. And so I really just want to underline what Enza said at the very beginning of their very moving statement, which is the best way to get someone's pronouns is to offer your own in a one-on-one interaction and to really not put them on the spot, but to provide space for them to then be comfortable with sharing what their needs are. Because I think that kind of at the beginning of this movement where people were gaining consciousness around pronoun sharing, these pronoun circles were really common. But if you're not in a set that feels like a supportive environment for this, it can actually be a really traumatic experience for the few trans or queer people who are there.
I really love that. I think that that's a really awesome way. One example of how we can also shift these types of conversations to include both yes and then also level setting of like, here's an experience that I had on a set in a real working environment that didn't work. I want to mirror you, Athena. Let me know if I'm doing this correctly. What I'm hearing is that pronoun circles might not be the best situation. I have a follow-up question. As a person who leads a lot of spaces and leads a lot of rooms, introductions round robin are very, very common. What are your thoughts on that? And how do you see that being how do you see those working together? Because I'm wondering, I'm sure we're going to be in a world where that exists for a while. And so I'm wondering, how do we mitigate that to make it a safe space for everyone?
That's such a great question. And obviously, these kinds of round robin introductions are incredibly valuable as icebreakers and getting to know each other on set environments. I think that probably what felt uncomfortable about that was that it was such a large group. I think that often these kinds of interactions, especially in like a getting to know each other circle, can be better in like a smaller, more intimate group that maybe are on more individual department bases, and also just doing a temperature check of how like safe the space feels. And maybe also not saying, maybe instead of saying, tell us your name and your pronouns, you could say, if you'd like to offer your pronouns, that way it's not as conspicuous if someone chooses not to offer them in that moment. And it's not that I felt particularly unsafe on this set. It's just that I felt very put on the spot by it. And, so there was that like dread of like being at the end of the circle and just feeling like an elephant in the room, and then feeling like people were going to have this anxiety about misgendering me and feel this like sense of seriousness about it, because instead of setting like a lighthearted getting to know each other tone, it set this tone of like seriousness that felt kind of unnecessary. I think a lot of times in these exercises they're more helpful if in icebreaker moments, if they are funny and personal, and maybe instead of demanding things, it's creating space to offer things instead.
I love that. Morgan, jump right in.
I totally agree with what everybody's saying. Something that I also was just thinking about was like, from a performer's perspective, I think that a lot, especially of like these day player roles, are like a lot. I'll go back. A lot of trans roles are day player, co-star, guest star kinds of roles. Like that's what's being written, honestly. And so a lot of the actors that are being cast in these roles, sometimes this is like their first experience being on set. Sometimes this is, so there's more layers than like just being trans. It's like they also like don't really know like how all of this works in general, and are just like excited to be there, and like the nervous feelings and like all this stuff. Like I personally have been out as trans for 10 years. I've been working as an actor for over 10 years. Like, so I can kind of like go whatever, do my little thing. But I know for a lot of people that are coming to these sets, like this is a pretty new experience for them. Which of course, I don't know exactly like what the action item is there. But I guess just thinking about like, this is kind of new to some people. And also just, something that Athena said made me think about like having like separate changing spaces is like super important. Or maybe, I don't remember, maybe it was Leah, but anyway, having like, so, and also in terms of like the SAG rules of like what's actually under the guidelines of SAG, like you have to have a separate fitting area, a private fitting area. And I've had experiences where that has not been provided. And it's led to some kind of like uncomfortable situations. Yeah. I mean, that's a totally different question, but
Totally. I also want to point out too, like not every part of this conversation is going to have an action item. So I appreciate you like trying to adopt my brain of like tactical things, but like sometimes it's just not going to happen. But I do have some things. My kind of takeaway here, level setting, is like smaller groups, offering like, please share your name. If you would like to share your pronouns, please do. And, having it, the purpose of that circle should not be just to get the pronouns of the people that you're wondering about in the room. It should be about getting to know everyone. And I think that can be a little bit of like a shift, a little bit of like, ask yourself, why am I doing this? And that can automatically takes you back a little bit and allows you to treat and nurture the space that you're a part of. And so I think that's really important. I really like that. So I want to keep going down this like on set kind of journey that we're on. So let's say we're on set and someone is continuously misgendering you, and you're really, that can have a lot of emotional, does not have you do your best work. What are some of the ways that we here have handled that? And what are some of the ways that other people on set have helped you? What have they done that's made that experience better for you? I can share right off the bat as an example. I had what I called my pronoun buddy in college, where I had a really good friend of mine ask me and say, hey, like, do you like it when the whole class corrects the professor, or would you rather us just not say anything? And I said, you know what? I like when someone else does it because I'm tired. And that was where I was at in college. I was like, I'm just tired. I don't want to do it. And so my pronoun buddy was like, okay, well, every single time I notice, I'll speak up about it. And just having that conversation created a safer space for me because they knew what I wanted. They knew what I was asking for. And it was just that simple 30-second conversation that made everything better. And so I'm wondering for you all if there are any situations that you've come that you feel comfortable sharing first and foremost, but that have, and how you've like mitigated that and how you've worked through that to eventually, get your paycheck. Jump in, Morgan, go for it.
We say, so one thing I also meant to mention this was, I had an experience where, and so like as a performer coming to set, like usually the costume department, besides like COVID testing, is like the first interaction with that set. So like that kind of like sets the tone for like what kind of experience I might be having on that set. And one experience that I had was like a little bit challenging was somebody, like as soon as I kind of walked in, like asked what my pronouns were. And I was like, I use he and they. And she was a costume designer. And then she was like, he, and just kind of like accepted that half of my pronouns and then like moved on. And I was like, I understand that, they, them pronouns, some people don't completely understand them and everything, but like a simple, like, okay, like would have been fine. And I personally don't prefer one over the other. Like I use both interchangeably. But to kind of have that, like, okay, great, I'm going to use this one that's easier for me. And I'm going to tell you that I'm going to use this one that's easier for me. Felt kind of dismissive. And it was like, okay, and now try on all these costumes, so that was an experience I had that was more challenging. And then in terms of more positive experiences,
if there's not, you don't have to find a positive for every negative.
Just don't do that. Like, and my, like in my beautiful ideal world, there will be pronouns on call sheets and everybody can just refer to the call sheet. And then, and I will say optional pronouns on call sheets because not everybody, feels comfortable like claiming set of pronouns or like wants to do that. And then people will be able to refer to the call sheet. But I've had many, many times on different sets where I'm like, even sometimes I've like been working there for a couple of days or like we're in between shots and like I'm getting ready to like go back and do my close-ups. Like, and I've like had people be like, what pronouns do you use again, by the way? Like, and it kind of just like takes me out of like focusing on my job and like gets me back into the brain of like, oh, these people are all thinking about my transness, are all thinking about like how they perceive me, all like, and it's like just a lot of extra noise and like layers then for me to work through in order to like do my job. And it makes it harder to do my job. And so I don't know exactly what the solution is. My personal ideal solution is having pronouns on the call sheets, which is a much larger conversation. But yeah, that's something I've run into and other friends might have run into on sets, like the constant asking, or I've had like, I was doing an exterior shoot once and it was like, in a very busy part of Manhattan, there were like a lot of moving parts, a lot of like background actors and stuff. And like in between takes, somebody on set like came and like asked me what my pronouns were, like in the middle of working. And I was like, oh, I like use he, they. And they were like, oh, what pronouns does my co-star use, who's another trans person who I'm friends with, but I'm like, ask that person, you know what I mean? And I was like, it just feels like, I understand everybody like wanting to get it right and all of that. At the same time, like I feel a little bit like there's a time and a place, like wait till there's like some downtime or wait till like I'm not right in the middle of doing the thing that I was hired to do,
Yeah, I think really quick, Athena, I want to lift up that one, what I'm hearing is like there's a time and a place, just like there's a time and a place to ask actors and dancers and whoever is working on set questions about themselves. You're not asking a lead on a set like about what they want for lunch and them like right in as they're doing their big scene, like zoom out, like it's not any different in a way. One of the things that I worked a lot. So I worked with like a very older crowd of rep directors at New York City Ballet a couple months ago. And one of the really old rep directors was like, so what I'm hearing is it's just really not that different. And I'm like, yeah, that's like literally, yeah, like secret's out. It's not. It doesn't have to be some crazy like mind. I was about to say a bad word. I won't, but you know what I mean? So it's like, I just want to lift that up. Like, is now the right time to be asking personal questions about somebody? If the answer is no, it's probably not the right time to ask about their pronouns. And as someone on set, if it's important that they know in that moment, they should probably want to address that they did not do pre-work and figuring out that before that moment and saying that and addressing that. And so I think that's really important too, pre-work, regardless of what it is. Athena, do you want to jump in?
Yeah, action item for people working in costume is just keep it in your notes. That way you don't have to ask them again. And, love what Leah said about doing pronoun check-ins every so often, but right time and right place. But there's so many places within our paperwork and within our notes where we can be keeping track of these things so that we don't have to take people out of their headspace and interrupt them. And so I just to circle all the way back to the initial question, I love it when people jump in and correct my pronouns on my behalf. I really appreciate that. And I think it's one of my favorite ally actions when like someone that I've worked with a long time sees someone on set misgender me or someone that I work with, and then they just quickly go, oh, them, it's they, them. And that, just really quick and not making too much of a point on it, and then moving on. And I really, really love and appreciate that action. And, if you're then a person who is taking notes on these things and keeping it in your paperwork and in your spreadsheets, and someone's pronouns, then you can jump in on their behalf. And, that's one way as the costume department that we work much more closely with the actors. And as Morgan said, we're often their very first experience on set. We're often the very first person that they talk to within the crew. And so you can consider yourself like, that you could do a little bit of extra work being an ally if you're here and you care about this conversation. Keep track of those things, and then you can step in when you see someone continually misgendering someone.
We have a question from the audience. So one, I'm gonna let everyone know as a reminder for anyone, any of the participants, send in your questions, and we'll also open it in the last 10 minutes for like live questions and answers if anyone wants to ask their question live. But this person's question was, knowing that every gender non-conforming person's experience is different, which we kind of hit on a little bit earlier. Do we have any thoughts as a group on what someone can do if they do make a mistake, knowing that everyone's kind of desired response out of that is and can be different? I think that is a part of the conversation that is often left out, that there is no gender 101. There are so many incredible resources which are great and we should keep making them, but it's not always going to be a color inside the lines of a situation. And so I guess I would love to open it up to, we haven't heard from Leah or Enza in a minute, but don't want to put you all on the spot. But what are some thoughts there?
I think for me, like so much of like the work of sort of like what I'll call like social justice work, like at large, is really about these systems have like lived in our bodies, and what they have produced is like a lot of shame in interactions with people, right? So like what I would say is like there really needs to be like mental and emotional work of like regulating around your own shame and opening to curiosity. So if something happens that is that there's a negative experience or awkwardness, like really just saying like, Thank you for telling me that. Is there, any other ways that I can like support you around this knowledge in the future? Like it doesn't have to be like, again, like the groveling like spiral. Like it really can just be like really doing the work to sort of like keep that shame. Like it's okay. Like it's like we mess up. Like we like like trans people also call their other trans friends wrong names and misgender, like we do that too. It's not like, we're trans and we're like, we get it all right. It's like, we don't, right? Like, and it's like the same sort of mental reorientings that we have to do around like systemic power, like interpersonal relationship is really about like how do we minimize our emphasis on the shame and the weirdness and the badness that we feel and open up to curiosity and connection. So I think it's just like in those moments, like of course, apologize if someone speaks up. It's really hard and vulnerable to do that. And again, like it's challenging within a power dynamic when you are maybe like not the one who is sort of feels on the same playing field. And so like I think it's really just about like facilitating more imagination and curiosity around gender, like at large, not just in the people you work with, but just like in general, because that's sort of a way to embodying knowledge. You need to learn the knowledge first and you need to challenge yourself. So I think like really what I offer, which I do actually think is practical, is like realizing again, which Len and I think that you've highlighted several times over, is that like we are people, safer sets are safer sets. And some of that work is like the personal work of like, being like, I don't, coming to these panels, but also like reading books, seeing media, sort of rejiggering the orientations that we've been given towards these pursuits and instead like flip them around and say like, how can I be curious and learn about somebody from a mistake? And like, that is going to instantly like level everything. If you say like, I'm so sorry. And like, thank you for telling me that. And like, what kind of support can I do around this now? Or like, taking a moment to check in, later, all these kinds of things, right? Like all these people skills. But again, like, I think it's really doing a lot of personal work around like, around shame and not feeling so like you're the worst person in the world if you make a mistake. Like you're not. Like, none of us feel that way, like when something like these instances happen to us, like, yes, of course we're like, oh, that person sucked or like whatever. But like most of us know that the reason these problems happen is not because of an individual person. It is because like we've all been indoctrinated into white supremacy and patriarchy, and our minds are wrapped around that, right? So I think more than anything, my thing is like minimize your shame through like knowledge and love and open yourself up to curiosity in all moments, not just moments where you're making mistakes.
I love that. And
So-
Leah, you go.
Yeah, just to tack on to that, because I think I also love that. I think that something that like Provvidenza is really hitting on as well is the idea of decentering yourself in that situation. I think like you go off and you do all this work and you're educating yourself, and then you mess up someone's pronouns, and then you start to like feel bad about yourself. And I think like the best advice I ever got from a trans friend when I was messing up another trans friend's pronouns was just to decenter myself and to think about the fact that it's that shame is based in embarrassment, and it's based in wanting to look good. It's based in wanting to do the things right. And I think giving yourself permission to mess up, but then also knowing that, if you messed up with somebody, it's not about you, it's about their feelings in that moment. And so I think that simple, just, I'm sorry, and then trying again is a really, really helpful tool to, I think a lot of times we have to deal with the misgendering, and then we have to deal with your feelings about the misgendering. And that I think is where more of the exhaustion or more of the hurt comes from. And I think we're all kind of hitting on that in different ways, that like, it's okay if you mess up, as long as you're seeing me as a person and we're having a conversation and we're being in relationship together, rather than like, I messed up, and then feeling guilty, and then giving me that guilt to hold while we're in the middle of a street in Manhattan trying to shoot a scene. You know, there's like so many layers.
Yeah, wow, I couldn't have said it better myself. So I won't. I think one thing I want to just, again, another tactical thing, you know, it's like on the other end of that, like for me in my experience, like you always know what kind of energy someone's coming to you with. So I mean, that's literally all it is. So it's like if you're coming with a genuine, like, hey, checking in, I'm not going to be like, you know, like it's going to be a little bit of a more fun conversation, you know? I want to keep the questions moving because we have some good ones. An easy one I can just answer and then I'll see if anyone else has any. But what are some good brands and companies to check out for undergarments? You know, unfortunately, on that quick timeline, Athena and I, you know, we utilized an Amazon search because it was really the only option we had. I'm not sure of the exact brand of tuck tape that it was, but it was good. And it worked. So that's an option. You know, doing quick Google is really great. As far as brands, I love this brand called Your Body, URBODY. One of the founders, Mir, I just had such an incredible conversation with them. They're creating great work. Another company, Tomboy, with an X in between, Tom X Boy. They make great undergarments. But the best undergarments for queer people, this is going to shock some of you, are made by queer people. So the problem is, though, with these undergarments is that they are more expensive because they are smaller companies and they need to keep themselves afloat. And so unfortunately, these garments are very expensive. And so even Athena did a really awesome thing for me, which they're still hot pink, Athena, if you know what I'm talking about. But I had a pair of undergarments from one of these places and I loved them. And I was like, Athena, make me something like this. And they were like, no, like I'll just put the color over it. And it was like a great solution. So that's another thing that you can do. Looking at a garment, mimicking one off of it, like whatever you got to do to, you know, make the world go round for you is totally your thing. But those are some brands I really like and enjoy wearing on set. So is there anybody else have any? Yeah, Athena, go for it.
I think that some people in the audience also might not be super familiar with the variety of different undergarments that exist for trans people. So like, for example, there is different kinds of things for tucking. There are tucking panties, tuck tape, things like that. And then there's binders for people who want to flatten their chest. There's packers. If you don't know what that is, Google it real quick. You know, and there's a pretty wide variety of different things that meet performers' needs. And so it might be good to do a little bit of research into that and to the variety of things that exist out there and start thinking about how to stock your kit with some basics that you can have on hand for moments like this. One of my strong desires is to create a resource guide for costume designers to have at their fingertips that will be different brands with shipping timelines and reviews from trans folks themselves. And so I hope that I can bring that to our community in the near future and share that as a resource. But it hasn't happened yet, but hopefully coming soon. And if y'all are interested, we might be able to get your emails and then send them out when that is ready.
Totally. And I want to echo that. There are so many undergarments I didn't even know existed. It's the same way that there's like all these new Spanx and Skims and like there's so many different things for all bodies. And so the same thing exists for queer bodies as well. Another question that we had as well was, it says, why aren't costume designers being proactive in making sure when someone gets talent sizes to ask the pronoun question and make it a standard operation in your department? I think that the answer to that is they should. And I think that the answer to it maybe like why they aren't is maybe they just didn't know. And so I will err on that and just say, make it a part of it. There's no real reason, I don't think. But I want to keep welcoming questions as well. But I think, you know, in the last in the last like 6 minutes or so, 5 minutes or so. Is there anything, the conversation is flowing great, but I want to check in with each of the panelists. And is there something that's really important that people listening are taking away from this conversation? I would love to do like a round robin. Speaking of, I think it's a small enough group, just about, what is important to you that people are hearing right now? And then we can maybe jump into maybe like a live question or two.
I think the main thing that we're all heading on is really that you are entering a relationship with a person, and we want you to just approach that in an authentic way and come at your conversations in an authentic way. I think one thing I try to do, I also send out like a little Google form, Athena, when I get new actors, and I ask 2 questions in that are, I feel like, are really good at sparking conversation. The first one I say is, what is a part of your body that you love to showcase? And then the other one is, what is a part of your body that you prefer to keep to yourself? And it says like part or parts. But I think that that's a really, really great way to spark conversation with all of your actors, because you could have an actor who's going to be in a scene and it has to be like a sexy scene. And they're like, I fucking love my collarbones, but I don't like want to show anything else. And so that shows you, okay, well, we're going to give you like a lovely strapless jumpsuit that covers everything but your collarbones. But I think that those are really great conversations that really help you enhance your costuming for anybody that you're working with, and really help you kind of enter a relationship with the person and their body, and work together to create something lovely. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I really echo the same thing, like intention is so it. And like Lennon, you're so right. Like the energy you come with, like if your spirit's good, like my spirit's gonna be good too, like that part, like, and yeah, just like remembering that, yeah, you're in relationship, like we want to collaborate. Like I know that we work in an industry, but we're artists, like let's remember that, right? Like when I get to work with a costume designer, I'm like, the thing that I'm excited about is like, wow, this person's mind works in a totally different way. Like we're going to get to like, kind of create even if it's 5 minutes in a fitting, it's like just having that moment of having collaboration, the intention of like art and people and relationship, like that's really what we should be doing. Like, it's like people are on the picket lines for a check, but we really need to be on the picket lines of our hearts and changing like the reality of why we have an industry that exists like this. And so much of it is actually in the emotional strata than anything else, And I think the other thing that I'll just like speak to that, like Morgan was saying, like, pronouns on the call sheet, or folks saying like on your fitting forms, right? Like one of the ways to disrupt is by like offering that to people, right? Like I'm sure you got director friends, producer friends, whatever, like making common practice can just be about like, it doesn't have to be that you had to do the test before coming to set about sexual harassment. Like, like it's like, it doesn't have to be those kinds of things. Like you can offer these things freely. Like this is part of the process. Like not only are safer sets, they're also more creative sets. So like anything that you can do that can advocate, shift something, like you have the power to do that. Don't think you don't. So like, remember that you have like the power to do these things, offer these things to other collaborators, and just like, yeah, like remember, it's art. We want to be making art. Let's not let the industry kill our spirit and the reason that we do this. And just like, yeah, keep it fun, keep it personal, and keep it pumping. Like costume designers are usually the most fun people I've interacted with on set. So like, keep it going. But yeah, just like, I think that's really just what it is. It's relationship, it's spirit, it's being here for the art first, even amidst the hustle and bustle, and I just want to offer that to folks.
I love that. Pick it up. What? Oh, the quote was so good. I really didn't want to mess it up. But pick it for your hearts, I think, or something like that. Morgan, Athena.
I would love to just share like a real quick story because I know we're coming up on time. I don't mind going a little over because the 2 more really good questions just came up. But people in the costume department, as several people have touched on, we're sort of the ambassadors to the performers, being the people that they work with the most closely, the most intimately in terms of physically. And, but I also consider us as department heads, I think that we have the opportunity to be like thought leaders on set. And we have the opportunity to institute change and like offer these to other departments. And I did something very bold once, because I remember in the prep for this, we were talking about how we can work with the casting department even. And I was working on a show for League of Legends, which we had, we dressed like 100 people in crazy science fiction period costumes. And we built this huge multiple like blocks of a cityscape in this warehouse. And it was so immersive and so amazing. And I spent weeks putting together this deck of who all of the different featured people were living in this village. And my imagination ran wild. And we had like blacksmiths and assassins and all these things. And in my book, I had put together options for gender diversity across each of these characters. And I submitted that to the creative team and they were like, this is amazing. And it totally disrupted the casting process, because when I saw the casting notices that they were about to send out, they had 10 featured roles for people in the village, and they were going to cast 9 of them as men and 1 as a woman. And I did something so bold, and I sent an email to one of the producers, and I was like, I'm a little bit shocked that that this is the case, that we don't have more gender diversity within this casting, and that all of these featured roles are being given to male performers. And it makes me sad that even in a fantasy realm that we can't imagine that a woman can be a blacksmith. And so I was so scared that I was going to get fired because I was like, this is so presumptuous of me, and this is totally out of my field. And then he sent back an email to me saying like, I'm embarrassed. I'm sorry that I didn't notice this. And we're going to make this part of our protocols going forward to check these things. And I had actually had a really negative interaction with a different producer who I pointed this out to him. And he was basically like, no, we're not changing anything. And then this guy who was higher ranking came in and was like, actually, we're changing everything. And we're recasting to have better gender diversity. And then we even included non-binary performers within that. And so that I just want to propose to everyone that we can be thought leaders in this process. We can have conversations with other departments. We can bring a greater awareness to this and change the industry from where we stand.
So we have 2 more questions. Because of time, I was thinking about maybe putting Morgan on the spot, because he hasn't shared yet about what he wants people to take away. So I was thinking, okay, well, what if I ask them this? So tell me if this question feels like something you'd want to answer. I think it might resonate a little. So someone said, I work in period costume and have had some experience working with non-binary actors and putting them into clothes from extremely gendered clothing eras. I'd love to hear from the panel, but in this case, I'd love to hear from Morgan, if that seems right. How to approach that, and what kind of conversations you have in a fitting that can make that feel better.
Definitely. I wrote like little notes on the side of things I wanted people to take away. And I literally wrote, period clothes fit weird. That's literally what I wrote. And like, like, especially like being trans masc and like just how my hips are, like men's pants, especially period pants, fit me differently. So I think the best way, or the best experiences I've had, are when I'm given many different options in terms of like size ranges, like a few sizes above, a few sizes below for like all different garments, because things don't necessarily fit me how they would fit a cis man, which is like who those clothes were made for. And so, yeah, the best experiences I've had are like when you come with a lot of different options, and also when it feels more collaborative, like of course within the scope of the character, but like maybe like, oh, I was thinking like there's this direction we could go, and there's this direction we could go, and there's this direction we would go, and like what feels exciting to you, and kind of like having it feel a little bit more collaborative. But yeah, having size options and having trying on different clothing options and just making sure that like, yeah, we're feeling comfortable with it.
Options. And to So I have some experience with this as well, a little bit, and I think sometimes it's helpful to hear about it in a different industry, or a different realm. Sometimes that helps people take themselves out of it a bit. But for me as a dancer, that's a big part. There's a lot of like very binary rep that we have to learn and perform. Similar in acting, I know, and so I think something there is also just having a conversation with the people you're dressing, like, like, this isn't you. This is a character that you're going to play. So how do we make you comfortable playing this character? And the answer to that was from Morgan, options. And that I think is something that we can definitely take away. Last question, I think, for today, and then I will close this out. What's the best way to ask for sizes and body type of a trans performer? I have thoughts. Clearly, I talk so much, but I would also love to hear from the panelists if any of them have thoughts right off the bat.
I think neutral language is really helpful, and that's really helpful to employ when you're doing your measurements as well. I always try to sort of also say what I'm going to do before I do it. So, I'm about to measure your arm, and then I measure the arm. But I think also like when I have that little like Google form that I send out, it'll say like things will be optional as well. So like they'll say like a bra size, but you don't have to put that. But anyone can put that, so keeping those sorts of things there that like we might still need to know a bra size for certain performers, but it's not necessary. And then if a performer leaves it blank and it's information you need to know, then you can approach that conversation on an individual basis. And then also I think including like, or just knowing that having an awareness that people's bodies are sensitive. So I think I always try when I'm measuring people as well to not call out the measurements as I do them. I think that that's a really helpful tool for everyone. But, and you can sort of ask your performers as well. I'm about to do this thing. Is that okay?
I love that. Awesome. Is there any other last things before I wrap us up from any of the panelists? I just want to say too, I've personally really enjoyed this conversation. It's got me a little riled up. It's the post-sickness kind of, I'm feeling better. This combo was great. Happy Sunday. But I just want to thank everyone for joining. I want to thank all the panelists for being here and being so open and willing to share. I think the theme of today is we're all people and we're all connecting on a human level and we're creating art for art's sake. And in order to do that, we all have to take care of each other. And so this is just one of the ways that we continue to make sets safer for everyone. And so I really appreciate the time all of you put in today to have a conversation about queerness specifically, but also remembering that this is a conversation that extends beyond all types of people. We are a big part of making sets safe, and we are a big part of evolving sets. And so I'm personally very inspired by this conversation. I am going to send in the chat my social media. So if anyone has any feedback or questions, follow-up comments, feel free to reach out to me on Instagram or via email. And I can also help direct any follow-ups that anyone has or any questions to the correct people. So with that, I will say thank you so much and appreciate you all for being here. Happy Sunday.